Thank you, everybody. This is Real Talk with Ryan. It is the last day of September 30th, and we are so excited to have Mike Roberts with us today as our special guest. Mike is the CEO of San Diego Code School. You will also hear a bunch of other cool stuff that he's doing as we talk about it, both in the community and in his nonprofit work. And really, Mike, what you're doing for people who are looking for a career path and giving them an opportunity is just exciting. So I can't wait for you to share your story, both how you got there and what you're doing. So with that, Mike, thank you. We're excited to have you. And as a starting point, would you tell us what San Diego's Code School is all about?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks again, Ryan, for having me on. I just appreciate any opportunity that I have to amplify the hard work that our students are doing and the opportunities we're trying to create for other folks. And so this is like I said, awesome opportunity for us.
You're welcome.
I started San Diego Code School after working at another code school that kind of unceremoniously sort of wound down. And I felt like I was not ready to give up and like leave the other existing programs in San Diego as the only option for folks. I felt like, let's continue the mission and figure out how do we continue to iterate on the model and have it sort of live again as San Diego Code School. So it started as I guess what you call traditional, put that in quotes, traditional coding boot camp, a program where in 4 months, individuals could come in and could skill up and prepare for entry-level roles as software engineers. So we started there. And the goal was to eventually become fully blessed by the state to be able to expand opportunities and charge more tuition and all that good stuff. And then we kind of took a turn. So I don't know if we want to jump into that or if we want to cover anything else about what we're doing. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things there.
Sure.
I think if you go into, we'll talk about the roadblocks with the state in a little bit because I want to cover that because it's always interesting how people overcome those and adjust when things are out of their control and really just put extra effort into developing and delivering on their vision for what they're trying to do in the community. But
absolutely,
talk to us a little bit about the challenge that students and people who have the aptitude to get into that space that think they could be programmers, how difficult it is for them to find jobs and really why you exist and did this in the first place for them.
Yeah, so what I found out in the space, so when I was working as a senior software engineer, I was giving a lot of these talks in the evenings and hosting meetups, and we found a lot of early career developers would come out. It'd be their first opportunity to interact with software developers and see people beyond what they were doing on their own that really enjoyed writing code. And I'd walk them around and give them a tour of the beautiful office, and they'd see the ping pong table and the dogs in the office and the beer on tap. And we talked about how we had haircuts and massages and laundry service and breakfast and lunch catered every day. And you just see their eyes get so big. And then they're like, so how do I get a job here? And I'm like, you don't, because you got to be a senior engineer. We don't hire junior engineers. You got to have like lots of years of experience. You got to be able to come in and deliver because we're a work hard, play hard kind of shop. You got to be able to carry your weight. And so it became increasingly frustrating for me to be like talking to people and really genuinely want them to be successful, but have no way of helping them beyond just like giving a talk at a meetup and saying, here's how you can somewhat navigate, getting through the roadblocks of the HR and all that kind of stuff. So this was right around the time that some bigger code schools started coming into San Diego. And so I had an opportunity to interview with all the code schools, and I kind of knew all of the founders and owners and people that were running the shops. And so I eventually took a job working for Origin. And that really was kind of like the beginning of like making that switch from just being sort of a hands on the keyboard to let's see if I can actually operationalize helping people at a much, much bigger scale.
How hard was that pivot? Because it's so interesting to talk about that because you talked to me earlier. We were talking about you have this aptitude for coding, and despite all of the directions from other people in your life saying, don't do that, or don't go to school for that, you should pursue this, you still stuck with it, you started working on it, you developed that aptitude, but it's a much different existence from the doing, like you said, on the keyboard, to actually running a business and helping other people do. How was that transition for you? How difficult was that?
It's still an ongoing process. It's still, you know, I'm riding that roller coaster as an entrepreneur where you got good days, you got bad days, and you have to sort of like think of it as a marathon. What is your goal? What do I need to do today to get closer to that goal? But I was fortunate in that I didn't transition directly from being a senior software engineer to being an entrepreneur. I think that would have been a disaster. I don't think I would have been prepared for that. But I had an opportunity to go into a small startup and see the mechanics and see the inner workings and see an organization that had been around for a year. So they had survived that first year. And they were in a position where they didn't raise a bunch of VC funds. They were trying to bootstrap. So I could see all of the difficulties and all the twists and turns and be sort of in the position where all I was responsible for was classroom experience. And then suddenly I was thrown in a position where like, okay, now it's not just the classroom experience. Now you're responsible for the entire business and you've got to do some CEOing as well as manage the classroom experience. So I was fortunate in that aspect where I wasn't just thrown in the deep end. I had a little bit of an opportunity to see it up close and transition from, you know, management and leadership that I had in the past to, I mean, I have a master's degree in management, but that did not prepare me for, you know, being an entrepreneur, running a small business. They're not the
It's
same at
so,
all.
yeah, it's so true. Everyone says, take these classes, study this, and we'll prepare you. And then you realize, well, that doesn't help me at all. I mean, it gives me a piece of paper to maybe lend some credibility, I suppose, but life is what prepares you a lot of times. So
Absolutely.
you used the words, we were talking about this, and you talked to me, and the words you used about your school and your idea is that you wanted to reimagine the school from the perspective of a student.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really cool phrase. Talk to us about what that means. What did you change, and how have you positioned this so that the students have a unique and better experience than what they've been used to?
So I think a lot of the folks in the bootcamp space think, you know, to be competitive, you want to be sort of like the program that everybody wants to get into. You want to be the desirable place. You want to be able to prove to employers like, hey, I'm doing a great job preparing them for these roles. And a lot of the focus is on that, is like the mechanics of how do we make enough money where we can have all the flashy, fancy campus and attract the students and have the best teachers. And instead I was like, all of this really is not nearly as important as this is really stressful for these students. I mean, they're coming in and in 4 months, it's just like, don't miss a day, don't slip, don't sleep, because if you don't give it your all in 4 months, you're going to probably fail. And on top of that, these are people that are like putting their lives on pause and going out and taking out huge loans, not being able to work, asking their family to like help support them and take care of everything else so they can just focus for like 12 to 14 hours a day on coding. It was just enormously stressful. And the fallout dealing with the human being, the human experience was like, how do I make this less painful for folks? How do I get them to focus on just come in and code every day? Just come in, let's get you in the spot, and let's just focus on that and all this other nonsense. And as we started addressing some of those concerns, more and more of the model that emerged was the apprenticeship pattern. Was, what if we can not have them have to pay, and instead we could pay them? And people thought I was insane when I said that, like, and still do. When I say none of our students right now, we don't have a tuition-based program anymore, none of our students pay anything, the first thing people say is, okay, so what's the catch? I'm like, there is none. We just pay people to learn how to code, and then we get them into fantastic companies. So, and they're like, but how can that be? Well, it's a lot of hard work. It's not easy for us to create a business and a model that does this, but I'm willing to put the work in because I think people will see this as a viable opportunity to do something that people just take for granted. Works for plumbers, and this works for carpenters, and this works for electricians. Why can't it work for these new collar careers like software engineers? It just takes people thinking outside of the box and thinking, what are the challenges that students have? Okay, got it. What are the challenges that employers have? Okay, got it. What if I can address teaching them all the skills that employers want today, they want people to be able to do on day one? And what if I can make the experience for the student close to like the oldest pattern that we have, how to learning beside a master, and you put those two things together and you figure out the other, you know, mechanics. Well, now we got a pilot. Now it's like game on. Let's see if we can start iterating on the model and making it better.
How far along are you in the apprentice program now? We talked earlier and you were just pivoting and launching into that. How has the progress been so far and the response from the students and the work?
So one of the challenges is I like to work at like warp speed startup pace. And
Yep.
instead I'm constrained by like government speed and institutional speed that's like not on the same time frames. So it took us 9 months to get a registered software apprenticeship program through the California mechanisms that do that. So for me, I thought that was the most painful experience ever. But then come to turn out, like I talked to other people and they're like, oh yeah, I did an apprenticeship in this state and it took 18 months. And I talked to somebody else and it took 2 years. And I'm like, oh, okay, whew, man, 9 months is pretty lucky then. So we got that done. But right as COVID hit, we had already sort of established who our initial partners were going to be. And the state gave us the blessing and said, okay, you are approved. You can begin hiring apprentices. COVID hit and they said, you get a shelter in place. And we're like, whoa. So we had to do that big pivot and figure out how could we adjust to doing this as a remote experience. And then a lot of employers that we had initially thought would be great strategic partners and be ready to go and we're ready to go, they said, well, we're not hiring right now. So then we had to kind of, go back through and prospect and find new clients and new partners to launch that first. And so when you talk about like roadblocks and hurdles that are going to come up, you've just got to be able to every day as these new ones, just compartmentalize it, focus on what do you need to solve for today? How do you triage and buy yourself some more runway? And then, get yourself thinking more strategically, where do you need to be in 6 months? What do we defer until we get to level 10 and we're into 2021? That kind of stuff.
Oh, I love that. No, it's so many people, CEOs all over, and really anybody has these roadblocks and this perseverance that they've overcome on their runway and their path. And you end up in so many interesting places that a lot of times you never thought you would. This is Real Talk with Ryan. We're here with Mike Roberts and CEO of San Diego Code School. If anyone has questions, the chat box is open. So I'm going to open it up right now. Chat is open. So feel free to drop in any questions that you have. I'll work them in. We'll also have time at the end for live questions once we shut the recording off. Mike, I'm curious about your path, right? Your journey. And as we've had amazing guests on, we've learned a lot about the journey that they've gone through to where they are today. And you're still on the journey and you have a long pathway to get what you're trying to accomplish. But from a kid in Boston wanting to be a pilot to running a code school with an apprenticeship program in San Diego there's a lot of twists and turns.
Oh yeah.
Talk to us about that journey because you've experienced and done a lot. And I think it gives you a unique perspective on what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it for these students.
Sure. So I come from a family of what I call educators, right? So my parents are teachers. Currently my younger sister is a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher. So I always knew I didn't want to be a teacher. I mean, I kind of wanted to be a teacher, but didn't want to live the lifestyle of a teacher, right? Which is like, you're not going to get a lot of fancy stuff. You're not going to make a lot of money. You're not going to take extravagant vacations, right? So those things didn't appeal, but I did like the nature of like the work that they did. So it's like, okay, let me put that in the back of the head and think about how do I get into being a helicopter pilot. And then as we moved to California, as I kind of got through high school and got to like a working age, I started working from the very beginning. As soon as I was able to get a work permit and start working, I was working 3 jobs at a time because this is like, I need my independence. I got to get out of the house. I need to figure out what I got to do to get a car. So, and my parents had the means to buy me a car, but they're just like, I'm not buying you a car. No one bought me a car. You got to work for it. Right. And they taught me that lesson of like, you got to put some work in so that you will value the things that you have. So I worked as a referee when I was in high school. I think that was like one of my first jobs as a soccer referee. And then I also worked in a restaurant, washing dishes and then, busting tables. And I worked in a little retail place. So and I very quickly had 3 jobs. And then pretty much until my mid-20s, I kept 3 jobs at all times. I'd quit one and then pick up another part-time job and just be working 3 part-time jobs while I was going to San Diego State. And I was on a 10-year program. So did lots of interesting things though, things that I thought were enjoyable that I didn't know if it was going to be a career, but at least got me sort of like, got me up, got me doing something. There was a time where I was a school bus driver. Didn't last that long, but I drove buses for a little while. I drove tour buses. So I drove into Mexico and get people tours of Tijuana. And then I became a DJ. And so I was in the clubs in Mexico and DJing in the clubs. But at that stage, I kind of realized the lifestyle that I was seeing as a DJ was not, I did some wedding DJs, but I mostly did like club DJing gigs. And I was seeing like, this is not the lifestyle that's sustainable, that's going to last into my 30s. So I had to decide, do I want to give up something that I love? and focus on things that could actually be better careers? Or do I just want to keep partying on Saturday and Sunday and just like party it up? So that's when I kind of made that shift, and I went more into being a trainer and training folks for a while, because I felt like in the corporate training space, I could get that itch of teaching, but get paid a reasonable salary. And then I started sort of moonlighting, like using some of my coding skills. It's like, hey, part of this training thing is making some of these training modules. I can use some of my JavaScript and HTML skills, and I can make a little side cash. And next thing you know, the side hustle of making e-learning content and training materials and learning management systems was like a full-time job. Next thing you know, I had like a dev shop and 12 engineers working under me. Eventually sold that, went to work for startups, and went into more like being a senior engineer at startups, at local companies. But that was the path that got me to where I was at, working for a shop where got all the fun stuff, right? The dogs in the office and catered breakfast and lunch and all the fun stuff.
Yeah, that's all software engineering is, right? Drinking beer and playing with dogs while you're at work.
For the most part.
Yeah. When we talked about running the business, right, and aligning these students up, you and I were sharing earlier before we started today that educating and training people is really not even a fraction of what you've got to do when you're trying to run a code school. You've got really two massive barriers, and I'd love to hear how you have partly overcome, but also persevered through these two barriers. The first one is obviously the regulations, right? And dealing with the state and what seems to be crazy rules, and I'm sure were written for a reasonable purpose, but are just massive roadblocks that seem so strange that prevent people from actually getting jobs. And then the second part of it is that the biggest chunk of a school is to find a career path and a job for them when they're done, because that's what attracts them to the school in the first place. And so the job is really this sales job to really connect the people who are hiring with the students who have the capability. So talk to us about those two barriers and how you've worked through and overcome and aligned that so that the outcome for the student and for your business is effective.
Sure. So, I mean, I got a real up close and personal vantage or viewpoint of like what happens when you don't work within the state's prescribed process. And they literally just shut down an employer that I worked for. They were just like, eventually they got licensed, they got approved, but the process of it was so brutal that it just put them out of business. And so from the very beginning, my goal was to see, even though none of the rules seemed to make sense to me, I looked at it as like a personal challenge. Like, okay, challenge accepted. Let me see if I can follow all the rules and actually do it. And even though they were bizarre and they didn't make sense, I was like, there's a way, right? Where there's a will, there's a way. And so, you start with like, okay, is there any exemptions to the rules? Like, where's the list of like other things I could potentially do? And you just go down the list. And then eventually when I found one, I was like, oh, wait a minute, here's an exemption. And the exemption is like, if you charge less than $2,500, then you don't need approval from this agency. It's like, all right, cool. So whatever I design as I design this program, it needs to cost less than $2,500, right? And so once you find that thread, then you can start pulling on it and start figuring, okay, how does that buy me enough runway? And then can I engineer a solution, which is, okay, can I charge $2,500 for long enough to meet all the other things on their checklists and then use that? And so just think about bootstrapping the business. How do you solve each of these problems until, okay, now you're finally approved. Now, along the way, it becomes significantly harder because like it's a catch-22, right? So you can only charge $2,500, but one of the other rules that the state has is you need to show like this like capacity to be at this ratio of like debt to income. Well, that's really hard to hit when you don't, you can't create this war chest of funds by charging a reasonable market rate for what the services are. So you're artificially held down by the state because the state says like, in order to play by the rules, you got to only charge this much, or you got to outlay a bunch of capital and wait a really long period. And so those constraints they're real, right? And so for me, it's really just about once I set my mind to, we're going to create something and then we're going to do the experiments and we're going to pilot and we're going to be agile and see where do we need to adjust to just make sure we live to fight another day. Like that's the big mantra, that it's like, okay, we got through today, we got into tomorrow, we've bought ourselves this much more runway. Let's see if we can continue to prove the model. So that's that side of it. I think of it as it's a cost of doing business. It's like the sunshine tax that people talk about. Well, one of the other taxes that we have in California is just working within their constraints that they lay out. And doesn't matter if they're brutal, doesn't matter if they seem like they're not fair. They just are what they are. And I am also one, I like to pay it forward. So, I have conversations with folks in Sacramento and I say, look, none of this makes any sense, but here's what I want to do. Once I get through it all, I want to pay it forward by seeing if I can help correct some of this, even though I know it's going to take us like 4 or 5 years. And I know it means you got to introduce some new legislation, et cetera. I'm not the kind of person that's going to like see this as a moat around the business and be like a lot of folks are just like, well, I don't want to help fix this for anybody else because this helps me protect my business. If everybody else has to go through this gauntlet, then I'm protected. I look at it completely opposite. Like, no, we need more innovation. We need more. Because I'm from Massachusetts. There's something like 400 educational institutions in the state of Massachusetts, like around the Boston area. So I don't think of this as a zero-sum competition game. I think of like, we need lots more innovation in the education and ed tech space to come up with the right solutions that are, I think, oriented more towards the students. So that's the first piece. Is just like, we got to work on these as a software engineer. I just thrive on solving problems. So yeah, give me a list of these weird things and I'll find the right path to be able to like check all the boxes and get all the way through. The other side is like literally knowing what it's like to work at some of these companies that I'm willing to get up and every day invite them to come to job fairs, invite them to come see the quality of the students and start building relationships, not just with the HR folks, but with like the engineers, and starting to create internal champions that will allow us to have the companies just think a little differently about their hiring practices and open up this huge pool of potential candidates that they're not going to be able to access if they're just using their traditional recruiting efforts by going to the local, CSU, San Marcos, or UCSD, right? Everybody wants to go to UCSD, hire the best and brightest minds, but the reality is they don't supply a large enough talent pool to fill all of these vacant software engineering roles. So even if you took all of their graduates in any given year, there are still going to be open positions that they then have to figure out. Are we going to bring people on an H-1B visa? Are we going to have people come from a different part of the country and move into San Diego and, the life-changing SD campaigns? But at the end of the day, we have talent right here in our city. And it's just about making sure that employers start to see and take an interest in investing in people that live right here in San Diego County.
Love that. We're here with Mike Roberts from San Diego Code School. Mike, you and I talked, and one of the passions is you're doing more than just training people with the aptitude to code to learn how and helping them find a job. And that's, if you just put that in its own box, right, that's admirable enough. But you also have a nonprofit element and component to what you do, both for your business, but really as in your life, because as we've listened to you today, we learned so much about your desire to enhance and improve the quality of our community. Giving people jobs that are effective and can give them a sense of satisfaction, but a sense of being able to profit from the effort and what they've learned. But you're involved with the Lisbon Vista Village, and you're developing opportunities in the community. Talk to us about why, really two things, why that matters, and what is it that you're doing in that form to elevate and give back to the community?
Sure. So I think it matters, and it's very personal to me, because when I'm in a room with a bunch of software engineers, very rarely do I see myself reflected in that group. And so, it's funny, sometimes I'll go into the meetup, and someone will walk up and be like, "Hey, Ezekiel, how you doing?" Pat me on the back, and I'm like, whoa. I'm not the person you think I am. I'm the other Black person that's kind of chubby and about 5'6", right? So, but that's, again, a lived experience that I've been used to. 45, so I'm kind of used to this situation where you walk into a room, you're kind of one of the only people that looks like you. Women, same sort of thing. You walk into a room, if it's a room full of engineers, may not be a full room of women. And so for me, being able to have more people that look like me would make me feel more welcome and more validated as a consumer of a lot of the software that I use. Like, I use all of these programs. How come are they really listening to and designing things that would surprise and delight me? I find that hard to believe if none of them look like me, right? So solving for that, figuring out how do we increase equity and diversity inside of this space, I think is a wide open opportunity for us to get better. And so part of that is meeting people where they are. And so in many of the communities that have higher Black, Latinx, women, LGBTQ, and neurodiverse populations that are traditionally maybe underrepresented, overlooked, they don't see themselves reflected in these career paths. And it's challenging for me to say that someone from an under-resourced community, the only path is for them to go to UCSD, right? Because that's just an impossible barrier that you're setting if you're saying to get into this field, to get into this career path, that's the one and only way to do it in San Diego. So that's quite personal to me, is like, why is there this huge pool of untapped talent that I know, because I've trained lots of people over time, have the capacity to do this type of work and be really good and have all of the core skills, have the ability to, you know, problem solve and destructure and pattern recognition. Those are the soft skills that are needed, not necessarily like math. And also just an interest. A lot of folks don't see themselves as content creators, as software engineers, because they just consume technology, right? They have a PlayStation, but they never thought about making a game on the PlayStation or the iPhone or the VR headset, right? So to me, being able to bring that into a community, I think it's kind of my responsibility, right? I kind of feel like if not me, then who to address that part. I think it also is one of the ways I just know can help transform communities and families and more rapidly economically develop an area than maybe other types of skills and trades, because there aren't many that you can start at like 62.5 your first year. And by year 2 or 3, you could be at 6 figures, right? You could be at $100,000 at year 5 or 6. It will continue to go up and you'll be at $150,000, $200,000. Now, sure, you could become like an underwater welder and maybe you make, you know, 6 figures after the first year or so of training, but I'm not talking about underwater welding. I'm just talking about like a regular job where you can show up, get better at your job and have that kind of an increase in your wage. And then imagine if you get 2 in your household. Imagine if it's a husband and wife duo and they both decide to learn how to code and can get themselves up to a family household, you know, $200,000. I mean, that's I think an amazing way to make an impact in some of the communities in San Diego that just don't have that opportunity. So I think that answered one of your questions, but I'm not sure if I got the other one.
Yeah, no, it did. And it's impressive to hear your passion for elevating the community. I like your phrase, meet people where they are. We tend to put a sign up and say, hey, we're here, come find me. And that just won't happen. And so there has to be more on purpose than that. What does the nonprofit arm or what you do, Lisbon Vista Village, do? What is its core function?
So Lisbon Vista Village is really this kind of like concept or idea of having a community of nonprofits, or we're just one of several other types of nonprofit organizations that are a part of this. So Synergy Center is kind of at the heart of it. So this Lisbon Vista Village the idea was Cheryl Lee, who's the founder of Synergy. She runs Bay Vista Methodist Heights, which is a nonprofit organization that's focused on affordable housing, right? So primarily they have these 2 different co-working centers, and out of the one in Southeast San Diego, they have this vision of creating not only affordable housing in that space, but having the co-working space. They've got Heartbeat Music Academy, which focuses on helping people in the community get into HBCUs for, you know, music careers. They've got the Boys and Girls Club that's been there for years. They've got our code school. And so our nonprofit's role is to act as a way for people to be able to sponsor, we can raise grant funds, and all of the students are employed by the nonprofit. We recognized when we started this idea of an apprenticeship, in San Diego, it was going to be really, really tough to convince a company to jump on board and just say, hey, we'll partner with San Diego Code School. You know, we'll hire 10 people. So we kind of had to stand up our own organization to be that first employer, to model what we wanted to see other employers do eventually. So it was kind of a gamble, right? Because it was like, we kind of had to design an agency style, not just an apprenticeship, but also an agency style model to ensure that we could have enough work coming in. We could have the nonprofit organization that could employ all of these apprentices. And then the code school is really responsible for oversight, for making sure we get projects, for making sure that we have, you know, the standards are met, we're doing the training, et cetera. The nonprofit is the heart to making this operational, because without it, we would have to rely on these large organizations in San Diego that have shown a tendency to not want to hire junior engineers. So asking them to, like, not only do I want you to hire somebody, but they're not even a junior engineer yet. How do you like that? They're just being like, get out of here with that nonsense, right? So it was the only way to make it work was to, like, hire them ourselves, and then be able to sort of, move on to the next level, which is convincing companies. Now that I've shown you how I can hire 9 people during COVID, how about you do that? Insert name of big company, right?
Right. I love that. You're finding people that have this capability or this aptitude and identifying it. Do the people that come to you recognize in themselves that aptitude exists, or is it something you help them find? So, I mean, you stumbled on, we talked about this, and you're working through it and you figure out, I'm good at this, and now I'm going to do this forum, and now I'm good at this, and now I'm going to be an organizer of this forum, and then suddenly you get a job and you become this software engineer. But how does someone recognize in themselves that aptitude exists to even be able to pursue what you're talking about?
So it starts as just an interest. I think that's where it has to begin. We actually screen for this when we're trying to hire or, find candidates. We want to know what's their motivation. Like, what is because what I've found over my, 5 years in the space is when students see an ad that says, learn how to code, make 6 figures, they're in it for the wrong reason. They're in it because to them, it appears as though it's a get rich quick scheme, and they can just invest 4 months. They'll pay a certain amount. It's like a transaction. You will just hand them something, and then they will just go get a job, and they'll just make all of this money. And it's like, no, it doesn't work that way. So it requires a lot of work and consistent effort. So it helps if students have an interest. And so I like to think, if we can identify people that are nerds, right? So what I mean by that is, like, maybe they're into science fiction, maybe they like taking things apart, right? Maybe they're just comfortable around a computer, but they don't have to, like, know a lot about software and, how it works. But if they're not comfortable around a computer, it's gonna be really hard to get them to the point where they're going to be comfortable as a software engineer, right? That's just, you got to get by that first barrier. So we look for some of these, like, leading indicators of this could be an interested person, and then really just give them some opportunities. There's tons of free training, as we encourage them, try it out. Because you're not going to know until you actually spend a couple of weeks wrestling with it a little bit and see if you like the challenge. Because some people don't like the challenge. You give them a problem and it's really hard, and they shut down and they don't want to. But software engineering, every day new challenges, every day something new, every day pushing. You got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And if that's not natural, doesn't matter how much you want to make, that 6-figure income, you won't get there. It's just impossible. So the assessment process is really a very human behavior, human factors involved. It's very little of the aptitude and I need to know, do you have grit? Are you comfortable? Are you motivated? I can teach you HTML, CSS, JavaScript. That's the easy part, right?
How many, I mean, you think about Navy SEALs and, like, what do they say? Less than 5% actually make it through. Do you have a lot of stop and restarts, or by the time the students get into the program, are they vetted and ready and feel like they're going to get through?
So when we were running a tuition-based program, I would say the failure rate was as high, if not higher, than many other programs. One of the challenges that we faced was our students didn't have as much skin in the game, because they were in essence paying $2,500 for a program that normally would cost $12,500. So you'll have more attrition, just like any other kind of, like, massively online course. If the barrier is lower and it doesn't cost as much, then you'll have more people that will just kind of, like, give up fairly easily because they don't have that much skin in the game. Which is why I think when people talk about, like, income share agreements and other, like, sort of interesting ways of financing a program, I think they're fatally flawed in that respect, in that if you don't have enough skin in the game, it's hard to get by that point of, like, okay, now I've invested enough time and energy and effort. I don't want to give up. I'm going to keep pushing forward. Right. So individuals a lot of times will just give up super early because they have that sort of, like, gym mentality of, like, the beginning of the year, you're all fired up. You're going to go in there. You're going to look svelte, right? I'm going to go work out and lose a bunch of weight. But by month 2, if you're not dropping a bunch of pounds, that expectation of, like, man, I've been putting all this work in, but I don't look like Arnold Schwarzenegger yet. People just, like, they quit. And so you'll have that if you don't have enough skin in the game. So we saw maybe as many as like 30% of the students that would just drop out, not complete when the barrier was really low, only paying $2,500. Now we've been fortunate enough to know that and to see that and have a slightly different approach now with an apprenticeship, which is I haven't had anybody quit, and I've had some folks that are challenged, and we're still early on. They've got, unique challenges because they come from a variety of backgrounds. They bring different skill sets to the table as they get into the program, but they're getting paid, right? We pay $18 an hour to start. And so you don't find many people quitting an $18 an hour job when they have the opportunity to just keep persevering and continue on that path of being a software engineer. So we're fortunate in that regard. We've got some better mechanisms to keep motivating people to keep going. I know it's hard. I know it feels like you're not making that much progress, but you are. Just keep going, just keep going. And eventually it clicks. And then suddenly they recognize and they kind of just blossom and realize, oh man, like I'm actually doing it. But that could take a really long time. I tell most software engineers, it could take you 2 years on the job before you lose what we call the imposter syndrome, right?
Yes.
You could be 2 years in before that goes away. Every day you go into work and you're like, oh man, I think they're going to fire me today. I think today they're going to figure out, I don't know what I'm doing and they're going to fire me. And that's just a natural part of learning software engineering, because you, by its very nature, you don't know what you're doing because you're building new things that in many cases have never been built before. Right. And so you're solving problems for businesses that may never have been solved before. Now, some of them, sure, so there's some routine things that you're going to do, but you're doing a lot of novel solutions to problems. And that is a true challenge for people. So.
No, I love that. Thank you for that. It's drawing back on remembering that it's not about some of these peripheral kind of soft things, but really about what you're motivated by and what you enjoy and what matters. It really is what gives you the perseverance. And Mike, it's been great having you on. I have one last question for you, and then we're going to open it up for live questions. And it kind of runs on this vein of perseverance. I know, and this is true of me, I look back on my life and more of my life's been about learning what I don't like doing or don't want to do than it has been about figuring out what I actually like. And some of our background and history is so similar in that, you're almost pushing on these pressure points and say, do I like this? No, I don't. Do I like that? No, I don't. Let's try this. And both of us got bad advice, right? Don't do this, don't do that, when we maybe should have. What helped you stay true to what mattered to you and to overcome some of those stops in research? Because it's so easy to get discouraged and drop your head and say, I'm just going to give up on this. The government's too busy. The work is too hard. The companies don't want to listen. I should go into accounting and not into programming. I should be a DJ and not be a business person. I should go to UCSD and not San Diego State, right? All these stops and restarts. How did you stay true to you to get you to where you are today? And I know the journey's not done, but I think we can all learn from lessons that you've lived already.
Yeah, so I think part of it is wanting to make your folks, your family, and the people in your circle proud of you. So you don't want to, I don't want to disappoint people. So I don't want to give up. I try and use that strategically. I try and create accountability partners and share, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing, so that I will be embarrassed if I quit or give up, because I'll be like, I already told everybody, so I guess I got to do it now, right? So part of that is just like, I guess it's just ego, just setting yourself up for success by not giving yourself the chance to quit. And like everybody knows, so now you got to be about your brand and get it done. The other part, this is going to sound super cliche, but the other part really is the lives and the impacts that you make. And right at the point where you feel like, oh man, this is it. I am done. I will never do this again. I'm so sick and tired of these students that just don't appreciate all the work that we're doing behind the scenes to make their lives so much easier. If you would just listen to what I'm telling you, you'd already have a job by now. I don't want to hear about you don't have gas money. I will give you a gas card. Get up here so we can work on your resume. Then someone gets a job. And you're like, all right, my bucket is refilled. I will be good for like another 3 or 4 months. And that's what kind of keeps the engine driving. It's like when I get to look now and know that the 10 apprentices that I have right now, they're already software engineers. They're not like software engineers in training. Like the day I hired, they're now professionals. They're getting paid every day to learn. And being able to give someone that, like flipping the switch and like going from like, you think this is the right career for you, you want to invest in it, you're serious, you interview, you get the, now it's like you've got the job. It's your, and software jobs, these are jobs that they are never going to have, like this is a skill they're going to have for the rest of their life. They're never going to have to worry about being unemployed for longer than a couple weeks. I know there are developers out there that are looking longer, they might get laid off, but it's because they're being picky. They can get jobs really quickly. I could get fired, lose everything, and know I get a job on Monday, right? And so the ability to give that to someone, to like say, I'm going to hire you and I'm going to train you, and now like for the rest of your life, at least you've got that level of security. You've got a skill that's in demand that will not change for the rest of your lifetime. And if you really enjoy doing it, awesome. But if you don't, even if it's not your passion, you're just kind of good at it and you're able to do it, then it gives you that stability to go out and like, okay, then learn how to play the guitar or whatever it is you want to do. You want to be a painter or whatever, right? But at least you have a steady, well-paying career that will continue to get better. And giving that to somebody, like being able to help them along that journey, there's nothing better than that. So that's what, at the end of the day, keeps it going. I got started with the, you know, accountability, like telling people what I'm going to do, not want to be embarrassed. But the thing that keeps you going is just like the wins. And I get a lot of wins. Get a lot of people. Like when I can tell people, yeah, I got people working at Apple, Facebook. I got folks that are working at Amazon, Walmart Labs. My first student at San Diego Code School got a job at Red Hat, IBM. Come on, getting somebody into IBM.
That's fantastic. Well, Mike, we really appreciate having you on. And it's so easy to point to the perseverance of the students, right? And the effort that they make. But it's so neat to hear the other side of that, that it takes someone else and the effort that they make to help complete that journey. And on behalf of all those students and really the community at large, for going and meeting people where they are and persevering to help complete that path, I want to thank you both from me and from all of them for what you've done and for that. So Mike, thank you so much for being here and doing this today. It was great to learn so much about your business, but also what you're doing for so many people. So thank you, Mike.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan, for having me on. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.